Hi, everyone. It's Grandmaster Ben Feingold. I'm back making more videos here on chess.com. Maybe some of you have seen that I've started again on my YouTube channel, but these will be more interesting videos. We're going to talk about lots of different themes here. And, well, hopefully we'll get a lot of views and you guys will learn a lot. So this video is going to discuss unexpected tactics, and we're going to show you some examples. And maybe you guys can find them more expected than I did, because some of them were actually my games. Okay, first game was a practice game played last year against one of the employees at the chess club in Scholastic Center, St. Louis. When we do chess lessons, he likes to actually play a game 30 and then analyze it and see if, well, maybe along the way he could draw or beat me. It hasn't happened yet, but doesn't mean it won't. Okay, so this is, it wasn't a Benko Gambit, but it looks like one. Black's down a pawn, and White has a couple of funny things in his position. His knight on e2 and his knight on the a3 square. You know, that's not, those aren't the typical, you know, places we're going to see a knight in these positions. And the reason is White's played f4, you know, which is, you know, aggressive, and then the white knight usually goes to f3 in this kind of position. So e2 is a little bit passive, and f4 is sort of aggressive, so it's sort of a weird mix. Okay, now I'm playing on the queen side, obviously. I have two open files on the queen side. I have the, you know, the bishop on this nice diagonal here, and I want to play on the queen side. So I played the move knight to b6. And with the knight going to b6, I'm fighting for control of c4. c4 is actually an important square. And this actually caused my opponent to blunder. Although, again, it's an unexpected tactic, so you might not find it so easy. My opponent wanted to play knight c4 and just block up the queen side. Then his knight wouldn't be on the silly a3 square. But, of course, I prevented that. I have two pieces defending c4. So my opponent, quote-unquote, blundered here and played the move queen c2. Queen c2, obviously, you know, defending the c4 square. And he thought he was going to play knight c4 next move. Maybe he'll connect his rooks on the, you know, on the first rank better because his queen's not in the way. And also, you know, preventing c4 because he has more pieces on c4 than I do. So that's what he was thinking during the game. So queen c2 made a lot of sense to him. Unfortunately, this allows an unexpected tactic. So maybe pause your video and see if you can figure out, black to play actually is winning now. So black to play and win. Well, the problem with queen c2 is it traps the bishop on d3. The bishop has no retreat squares. Whenever my opponent puts pieces on the third, fourth, or fifth rank and they can't retreat, well, if you can attack them, that could be quite dangerous. And one of my good friends in chess, Dean Ippolito, international master, he said the three moves you have to look at in chess are captures, checks, and threats. And so here, the checks aren't dangerous, the captures aren't dangerous, but when you threaten a big piece with a small piece, that could be potentially very dangerous. So a very important move to look at is the move c4. And you guys know me, as I like to say c4 is explosive. And the reason you analyze c4 is, number one, it attacks a bishop, which can't retreat. And number two, it's very forcing. White doesn't have 20 or 30 options at his disposal. White has to do something about his bishop. Okay. The problem with taking the pawn, it doesn't really matter which way you take it. You're going to get pinned on the c line. In fact, that's going to be the subject of another lecture coming up soon. So that's the problem with queen c2. It not only traps the bishop, but it wakes up to a pin later. So after the move knight takes c4, I just took the knight, and after bishop takes, I played queen to c8. I could also play queen c7, same thing. And it doesn't matter if my opponent has a knight on c4 or a bishop on c4, it's the same thing. For example, if my opponent had taken with a bishop, okay, then we get the same kind of trick. The main idea is you can't play b3, which you'd really like to play, because as I said earlier, this diagonal is owned by black. Okay, and in this position, if white moves his knight away and defends his queen, he loses in the same way he loses in the game. Once we trade queens, there's no defense to this knight on e2, and black's up a piece. Now, in the actual game, after c4, white took with his knight, and we got the same kind of thing. Takes, queen c8. You can't defend your bishop, and if you move your bishop, which is what he did, I traded queens, and I took on e2, and I'm up a piece. Now, we could end the video here, but the end was actually sort of funny. So he played rook e1, and I played the precise move, bishop d4 check, forcing his king in the corner. And this is a funny position. My bishops look a lot better than his bishops, and fortunately, I have an extra knight. And he saved his a-pawn. I once again lined up on the c-file. That c-file didn't really work well for him. He played bishop b1, which is a funny move, and now his rook is trapped. Rooks usually aren't trapped on e1, but the truth hurts. Bishop f2, bishop e2. I like the geometry here of the bishops. They were lined up on different squares, and they're still sort of pretty. Of course, prettier for black because he's up a piece, and the white rook is trapped. White resigned. So queen c2 was the losing move. I hope you found the unexpected tactic C4. Let's look at another tactic. Now, in unexpected tactic number 2, we have future world champion Magnus Carlsen. This game was played in 2004, 13 years ago. So Magnus Carlsen was playing in a tournament that no longer exists. It's the C group of the Tata Steel tournament. I actually don't believe it was called Tata Steel then. It might have been. It's played in Vikonsay every year. And now they only have an A and a B group. So you can imagine the C group wasn't as strong as the A or B group, but Magnus Carlsen was probably 12 years old at the time, so he has a good excuse. Okay, now he's playing Sipke Ernst. I'm not sure how good he was then, but he's a grandmaster now, one of the top Dutch players. And this looks like a boring Caro-Kann. I understand the players castled opposite sides, but this doesn't look very exciting. And when you think of Magnus Carlsen now, you think, okay, he's going to slowly build up and maybe win some slightly better endgame. But this is a very young Magnus Carlsen, so we're going to see some unexpected tactics here. So actually, in this position, Magnus plays a brilliant move that sacrifices material and starts a brilliant attack against his opponent's king. So pause the video and see if you can find it, and then we're going to show the scintillating finish. Okay, hopefully you found the sacrifice knight g6. And a lot of times in Caro-Kanns, if you're afraid to take that knight, which I'm sure black was, we can play rook f e8 safely. Unfortunately, in this particular position, after we trade on e7 and take on c5, white is just a pawn up. And if black doesn't take that pawn, white has a very nice square on d6 for his bishop, and that's not good for black. You can't take the pawn right away. That's not an unexpected tactic. That just loses a rook. And if you trade rooks first so that you can, quote-unquote, safely take the pawn, now you walk into a fork, bishop to d6. The truth hurts. Okay, so actually, after knight g6, if you don't take that knight, you're going to end up losing a pawn with a bad position. So you might as well get a piece for your troubles. So Sipke Ernst took the knight, queen takes e6 check, king went to h8, and now it looks like you can simply win your piece back, but it's not the case. We have knight d5, and the queen is attacked, and the bishop is attacked by two of black's pieces. So that doesn't work. So it looks like, in this position, white's just down a piece, but that's fine with Magnus. He has a monster attack. He plays h takes g6. So now, this is really scary if you're black. We have this open file to attack your king. The king on h8 is trapped. The pawn on g6 is a monster. Look at this pawn on g6. That's not good for black. And eventually, white's even going to take his piece back. Queen takes e7. Actually doesn't have anywhere to go. Okay, so black played a really nice retreating move here at knight to g8. It defends h6, it defends e7, and it attacks the bishop on f4. So, wow, knight g8's a pretty good defensive move. Okay, but Magnus isn't done. So, time to pause the video again and see tactic number 2 in this position. Amazing. Magnus plays just another brilliant move. Okay, and hopefully you found bishop takes h6. Obviously, that bishop must be captured, because if the bishop moves away, basically anywhere, g5, f4, it's going to be the worst discovered check of your life. Unless you have the white pieces, then it's great. Okay, so he took with a pawn. That way he keeps his bishop defended. And Magnus did it again. Rook takes h6 check. You can't play king g7 because of mate in 1, as I like to say, with advantage. So after rook h6, obviously he took with the knight. Magnus played queen takes e7. Magnus is running out of material to sacrifice with. Maybe he thought he was playing Bughouse. Okay, so white has the obvious threat of queen h7 mate. It's obvious, but it's not obvious how to stop it. Also, g7 check, isn't so bad itself. It's not a bad move. So Magnus is down a rook and a piece, but I don't think the black queen on a5 is helping in the defense of the king. Well, queen h7 mate, it's hard to stop. Okay, so he played knight f7. That stops queen h7 mate. And he takes on f7. Now, I always like to tell my students, in the opening and middle game, you very rarely see a pawn on the 7th rank. And if that pawn stays there, I like to say it's worth more than a rook, although a lot of people say it's worth a rook, but pawn on the 7th rank is a monster. Now here, we're threatening very simple queen f6 check and rook h1 mate, and that's got to be stopped, but that's not easy to stop. And there's other threats too, but that's the main threat. Okay, so king g7, that stops queen f6 check, and it stops rook h1 check, because rook h1 isn't check anymore. And Magnus finishes the game quickly. He plays rook d3, because he wants to get his rook to g3, now that the king is on the g file. And queen e1 is not mate, because Magnus also has defense over here. Queen on e7 does double duty. Rook d6, so he can try to block the rook on g6. You can't take the rook. I just told you why, because of queen e1 mate. Some of you are going to say, that's not mate, rook to d1. Well, it's going to be mate next move. Okay, so rook d6 was a nice defense. Rook g3 check. Rook g6, the point. Queen e5 check. Man, this is getting tough. You got a queen and a rook all over you. King takes f7, and queen f5 is winning. This is very nice. So here, black fell on his sword. But if you'd play a normal move, let's say king e7, still hoping for queen e1 mate. Before we take this rook on g6, we play rook e3 check, stopping queen e1 mate. Then we take the rook on g6. White has a mating attack, and white is ahead 3 pawns. That's not good. So black decided instead of losing like that, he would lose quickly, which is more fun for you guys. He played rook to f6. And this next tactic is not unexpected. It's mate in 1. Can you find the mate in 1? I'm not going to let you pause the video. You got to find it while I'm talking. It's mate in 1. Okay, there's not that many checks. There's maybe 5 or 6 checks, and one of them is mate. Queen d7. That's why he became the world champion. He's excellent in mate in 1. Okay, let's look at our final unexpected tactic next. Now, the last one isn't really well known, but it's played by Vishy Anand, who's a great tactician, against the early retired Joao Lautier. And actually, Lautier not only was one of the top 10 players in the world and Kramnik second for his match with Kasparov, where he famously tried out the Berlin. There was actually a big interview recently with Lautier in New in Chess magazine discussing why he retired and what he's doing now and all that kind of good stuff. Joao Lautier beat Kasparov twice with the black pieces, so he's no slouch. Now, Anand has really changed his style since he turned 40 years old. When he was in his 20s and early 30s, this was the kind of tactics I could show you. And now that he's in his 40s and it's not really his style, he plays 20, 30 moves of prep. His prep is immaculate, and he basically doesn't lose. So by drawing and winning almost all the time and losing very infrequently, Anand has maintained a top 10 rating, even though he's 47 years old. Okay, now this game was played 20 years ago, so we're going to see some great tactics from Vishy. So already you can see this is a very unusual, strange position. White did not castle and cannot. Black did not castle. Maybe he'll castle later. Black's bishop is fianchettoed on g2. Probably never saw that before. White's rook on e3 is pinned and attacked. White has a rook on the 7th rank. So this game doesn't make a lot of sense, and that's what Vishy Anand was good at. So 20 years ago, this was in a non-position. Now you don't see him having this kind of game anymore. Okay, well, that pawn on h6 could be annoying, especially if black wants to castle. So he played g takes h6. Makes sense. And even if black doesn't castle, he could play something like rook g8 and get the open g file later. And you might as well take another pawn. Black's up 2 pawns. Okay, so here white made a very unexpected tactic, and I'm willing to bet a large sum of money his opponent didn't see it coming. Because if I saw this move coming, I would probably lose on time before I played g takes h6 just to avoid it. It's just a brilliant move. So pause your video. White to play and win. An amazing tactic from Anand. And unlike the other unexpected tactics, this one might be a little tougher to find. Anand played the move bishop to g6. Okay, that's not your everyday tactic. Now that move does a lot of stuff. It threatens bishop takes f7 check. It threatens rook takes e6 check if the queen on d4 decides to move, which of course it does. And the black king is under tremendous fire. The main threat is actually queen takes queen. It's a discovered attack. Well, black can't really give his queen away. Can't lose your queen. So he decided, taking the opponent's queen leads to mate, so he did something else. Let's look at taking the queen, okay, and let's see what happens. Now we play rook takes e6 check. The pawn on f7 is pinned due to bishop g6. King f8. Bishop h6 check. Paul Morphy would be proud using all of your pieces. And bishop f7 mate. That's just amazing. White uses all of his pieces to checkmate his opponent. It doesn't help if instead of king f8, he retreats his knight to e7. We actually see the same mate. In fact, there's probably more than one mate now. But it's actually the exact same checkmate. There's no difference. We got the 2 bishop checkmate. Okay, now he could play knight takes e3, which he didn't do, and that would lead to all kinds of problems, because after white trades queens, he can play bishop takes e3, bishop a3 check might also win, but this one's easier. And now white's threatening bishop takes d4, bishop takes h6 mate, and king takes g2. So this would be a good time to resign, because you can't stop any of those threats. All right, so after bishop g6, Lautier played a really tough move. I mean, he found a good defense. He played knight e7. Okay, this does 2 things. It protects the queen on d4, and it protects f7 from the rook on b7. So knight e7, that's pretty solid defense. It doesn't work, but at least he tried. The reason it doesn't work is in the long run, this bishop on g2, that's not a good bishop. Okay, so white traded queens, queen d4, and then played a really nice move, rook to d3. Yeah, that's tough for black. And the reason is, if the rooks get traded, let's trade the rooks. Now, not only is white's bishop no longer attacked on g6, he's threatening rook d8 check with a skewer, and he's also threatening the bishop on g2. White always has a lot of threats somehow. So rook d3 was great. Lautier played rook to d8, an excellent move. His idea is, if you trade rooks on d8 and the king takes, we can block with knight c8. So for example, rook d8, king d8. Now this skewer that was working before, black has a knight c8 defense. So I must admit, this was brilliant from Anand, and it was brilliant defense from Laudier. It just, the attack turned out to be stronger than the defense. So after rook d8, Anand played rook takes and bishop to d3. And in this position, Laudier decided to resign because bishop takes h6 is a threat, bishop a3 is a threat, rook takes a7 is a threat. The black rook is terrible on h8. White also can play bishop b2, attacking the rook, followed by bishop to f6, pinning the knight forever. And I didn't tell you the main threat yet. I saved the best for last. King takes g2. And that bishop is not going to be saved. There's nothing to do about that bishop. So here, with material basically almost equal and white having 4 or 5 threats, and he saved his bishop on g6, black resigned. So that was an amazing tactic from Anand, and we saw a lot of that in the 1980s and 90s. We see less of it today, but that's why chess is great. We can look at your old games and see how it used to be, and hopefully people will do that with me in the future. Okay, this is Grandmaster Ben Feingold with one of my favorite videos, Unexpected Tactics. Hopefully, when you have unexpected tactics, your opponent will be the one that's surprised and not you. See you later, everyone.